Silas Boone stood on the platform and watched the woman step off the train, and his stomach dropped like a stone into cold water. This wasn't what he'd ordered. He'd written for plain, for practical, for forgettable, a woman who'd fade into the background and ask for nothing. Instead, Clara Whitmore turned her sharp green eyes on him, and he saw trouble wrapped in calico and worn leather boots. She wasn't soft, she wasn't meek, and the way she looked at him, like she was measuring him and finding him wanting, told him everything he needed to know. His quiet, controlled life was about to burn down around his ears. If you want to see how a man who asked for invisible got a wildfire instead, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The train hissed and groaned as it pulled into Red Hollow, belching steam across the platform like a dying animal. Silas stood with his hat pulled low, hands shoved deep in his pockets, shoulders stiff. He hadn't slept right in days. The letter had been clear. He'd been specific, plain, sturdy, quiet. A woman who wouldn't ask questions or expect things he couldn't give. He'd buried one wife already. He wasn't looking for another love story. The conductor swung down first, then turned to help a figure in a faded blue dress. She didn't wait for his hand. She stepped down on her own, one boot hitting the boards with a solid thud, and straightened her spine like she was squaring up for a fight. Silas felt his jaw tighten. Clara Whitmore was not plain. She was tall, lean in a way that spoke of hunger more than grace, with hair the color of wheat pulled back in a knot that had come half undone. Her dress was clean but patched, her hands bare and calloused. She carried a single carpet bag and a bedroll tied with fraying rope, but it wasn't any of that which made Silas's chest tighten with something close to panic. It was her eyes. Green and sharp as broken glass, they swept the platform, the town, the dusty streets beyond, and finally landed on him. She didn't smile. She didn't blush or look down. She just stared, and he had the uncomfortable feeling she was cataloging every weakness he had. Silas Boone? Her voice was low, steady, rougher than he'd expected. That's right. He didn't move. Neither did she. I'm Clara Whitmore. She shifted the bag to her other hand. I assume you're the one who sent for me. I am. She nodded once. Then let's not waste time pretending this is anything but what it is. You need help running a ranch. I need a roof and a future that doesn't involve answering to another man's mother. We marry, I work, and we stay out of each other's way. That sound about right? Silas blinked. He'd expected nerves, maybe tears, certainly some kind of feminine hesitation. Instead, she was laying terms like a hired hand negotiating wages. That's about the size of it, he said slowly. Good. Clara glanced past him toward the wagon. That yours? Yeah. Then let's go. I've been on a train for 3 days, and I'd like to see what I'm working with before the sun sets. She walked past him without waiting for permission, her boots kicking up little clouds of dust. Silas stood there for a moment, hat still low, jaw still tight, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. Behind him, old Morton Gill, who ran the grain store, let out a low whistle. That the mail order, Silas? Seems so. She don't look much like what you described. No, Silas muttered. She sure as hell doesn't. He followed her to the wagon. Clara had already tossed her bag in the back and was inspecting the horses with the kind of focus a man might give a rifle before a fight. She ran her hand down the mare's shoulder, checking the harness, the hitch, the way the leather sat. These are good animals, she said without looking at him. You take care of your stock. I try. That's more than most do. She climbed up into the seat, arranging her skirts with brisk efficiency, and waited. Silas climbed up beside her, took the reins, and clicked his tongue. The horses started forward, and Red Hollow fell away behind them in a haze of heat and red dust. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The road stretched out ahead, rutted and hard, winding through low hills covered in scrub and stone. The sky was a pale, bleached blue, the kind that promised no rain and no mercy. Silas kept his eyes forward, but he could feel her watching the land, taking it in with the same careful attention she'd given the horses. How far? She asked finally. About an hour. What's the house like? Small. 2 rooms. Needs work. Everything needs work. She said it like a fact, not a complaint. Silas risked a glance at her. You always this direct? You always this quiet? His mouth twitched despite himself. Fair enough. She pulled a canteen from her bag, took a long drink, and offered it to him. He took it, surprised, and drank. The water was warm and tasted like metal, but it was wet. I'm not what you expected, Clara said after a moment. It wasn't a question. No. Good. I wasn't expecting much either. She took the canteen back and capped it. Let's see if we can both be wrong. The ranch came into view as the sun dipped low, painting everything in shades of burnt orange and shadow. The house was small, weathered gray wood with a sagging porch and a roof that had seen better days. The barn was in slightly better shape, though the corral fence leaned at an angle that suggested one good wind might finish it. Beyond that, dry pasture stretched out toward distant hills, dotted with cattle that looked more like dark smudges against the earth. Clara climbed down before the wagon even stopped. She stood in the yard, hands on her hips, turning in a slow circle. Water? She asked. Wells behind the house, creek's a quarter-mile south, but it's been low. Stock? 40 head, maybe less now. Lost a few last month. Rustlers or drought? Both. She nodded, still scanning the land. You got neighbors? A few. Cray's place is 2 miles west. Dunner's are north. There's others scattered around, but we don't see each other much. Why not? Silas hesitated. Folks tend to keep to themselves out here. Or someone makes sure they do. Clara's eyes flicked to him, sharp and knowing. There's always one man who thinks he owns more than he does. Who is it here? Silas felt something cold settle in his gut. How'd you know that? Because I've seen it before. She picked up her bag and walked toward the house. East, west, doesn't matter. Power works the same everywhere. He followed her inside. The main room was dim, the furniture sparse, table, 2 chairs, a stove that needed cleaning. The second room held a narrow bed, a chest, and not much else. Clara set her bag down and looked around with the same measuring gaze she'd used on everything else. This'll do, she said. Where do you sleep? Out in the barn most nights. She turned to face him fully for the first time since they'd left town. We're married, Silas. Or we will be tomorrow. You don't have to sleep in the barn. I figured you'd want privacy. I want a partner who doesn't treat me like I'm made of glass. She crossed her arms. I didn't come out here to be coddled. I came to work. If you can't handle that, say so now. Silas met her eyes. They were hard, yes, but there was something else underneath, something raw and tired and determined. She'd been hurt before. He could see it in the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself like she was ready to run or fight depending on what came next. I can handle it, he said quietly. Good. Clara turned back to the room, already moving on. Then tomorrow we get married, and the day after that I start learning this place inside and out. I won't be dead weight, Silas. I'll earn my keep. I didn't ask you to. You didn't have to. She pulled a blanket from her bag and shook it out. Now get out. I need to change and I don't need an audience. Silas left, closing the door behind him. He stood on the porch for a long moment, staring out at the darkening land, and tried to make sense of what had just walked into his life. He'd wanted simple. He'd wanted invisible. Instead, he'd gotten Clara Whitmore, and he had no idea what the hell to do with her. The wedding took place the next morning in the front room of Reverend Hale's house. It lasted less than 10 minutes. Clara wore the same dress she'd arrived in, and Silas wore the cleanest shirt he owned. Hale read the words. They both said, I do. And that was it. No celebration. No guests. Just 2 people standing in a dusty room, binding themselves together for reasons that had nothing to do with love. When it was done, Clara signed her name in the register with a firm, steady hand. Silas did the same. Hale wished them well, though his eyes lingered on Clara with the kind of curiosity that made Silas's jaw tighten. They walked back to the wagon in silence. Clara climbed up without help, and Silas took the reins. You all right? He asked as they started back toward the ranch. Why wouldn't I be? Most women get emotional at weddings. I'm not most women. She looked at him, and for the first time there was something almost like humor in her eyes. And this wasn't a wedding, Silas. It was a contract. Let's not pretend otherwise. He couldn't argue with that. When they got back, Clara didn't waste time. She changed into an old pair of trousers she'd packed, men's trousers, patched and worn, and tied her hair back with a strip of cloth. Then she walked straight out to the barn. Silas found her inspecting the tack, running her hands over saddles and bridles with the same careful attention she gave everything. "You ride?" he asked. "I can learn." "It's not easy." "Neither is anything else worth doing." She picked up a saddle that was nearly as big as she was and hefted it onto the rail. "Show me." So he did. He showed her how to saddle a horse, how to check the girth, how to mount and sit and hold the reins. Clara listened without interrupting, her face set in concentration. When it was her turn, she struggled with the saddle's weight, but didn't ask for help. She got it on crooked the first time, and Silas wordlessly adjusted it. She nodded, memorizing the correction, and tried again. By the time the sun was high, she'd saddled the mare 3 times and ridden her around the corral. She fell off twice. The second time, she hit the ground hard enough that Silas started toward her, but she was already pushing herself up, dirt smeared across her cheek, eyes blazing. "Again," she said. "Clara, again." He stepped back. She mounted, and this time she stayed on. That night, she limped into the house, every muscle clearly screaming, and made supper without a word of complaint. They ate in silence, the only sound the scrape of forks on tin plates. When she finally sat back, she looked at him across the table. "Tomorrow I want to see the cattle," she said. "It's a long ride." "Then we leave early." Silas studied her. Her hands were blistered, her face sunburned, and she moved like every bone in her body hurt, but her eyes were steady and her jaw was set. "All right," he said. "Early it is." She nodded, satisfied, and rose to clear the plates. Silas watched her move through the small space, this stranger who was now his wife, and felt the ground shift under him in a way he didn't understand. He'd wanted safe. He'd wanted easy. Instead, he'd gotten a woman who looked at the hard edges of frontier life and walked straight toward them. And for the first time in a long time, Silas Boone felt something that might have been hope. They rode out at dawn, the air still cool, the sky bruised purple and orange along the eastern edge. Clara moved stiffly in the saddle, but she didn't complain. She kept pace, eyes scanning the land, taking in every rock, every scraggly tree, every dry creek bed they passed. The cattle were scattered across a wide stretch of brown grass, thin and ragged, but alive. Silas counted heads out of habit, his jaw tightening when he came up short again. "How many missing?" Clara asked. 3 more since last week." "Rustlers?" "Probably." "You report it?" Silas gave her a flat look. "Sheriff's in Wade Cutter's pocket. Reporting it would be like asking permission to get robbed." Claire's expression didn't change, but her eyes went cold. "Wade Cutter, that's the man you didn't want to name yesterday." "Yeah." "What's his play?" Silas dismounted and checked the nearest steer, running his hand over its flank. "He controls the water, owns the rights to the main creek that feeds the whole valley, charges fees to let folks water their stock. Fees keep going up. Anyone who complains finds their cattle stolen or their fences cut. He's been squeezing people out for years. And nobody fights back. A few tried. They lost their herds. One lost his barn. Another left the valley altogether." Silas straightened, meeting her eyes. "Wade doesn't fight fair, Clara, and he's got men who'll do whatever he tells them." She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. Then she said, "So we fight smart." "We? You think I came out here to hide?" She swung down from the saddle, landing with a wince she tried to cover. "If this land is ours, then we defend it, together." Silas wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her this wasn't her fight, that she didn't understand how dangerous Wade Cutter was, that she should stay out of it and let him handle things. But the words stuck in his throat, because the truth was, he'd been handling it alone for years, and all he'd done was lose ground. "All right," he said finally, "together." Clara nodded, and for the first time since she'd stepped off that train, something like a smile touched her mouth. It was small, quick, and gone before he could be sure it was real. But it was there. They worked the rest of the day checking the herd, mending a section of fence, hauling water from the creek. Clara learned fast, her hands quick despite the blisters, her questions sharp and to the point. She didn't shy away from the dirty work or the heavy lifting. She just dug in and kept going. By the time they rode back, the sun was setting again, painting the land in shades of red and gold. Clara sat slumped in the saddle, exhausted, but her eyes were still alert, still watching. "You're tougher than you look," Silas said. She glanced at him. "I'd have to be." "Why'd you really come out here, Clara?" She was silent for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she said, Because back east, I was someone's daughter, then someone's burden, then someone's mistake. I was tired of being someone's anything. Out here, I thought maybe I could just be Clara. No explanations, no apologies. She paused. Turns out the land doesn't care who you were. It only cares if you can survive it. Can you? She looked at him, and this time the smile was real. Tired. A little bitter, but real. I guess we'll find out. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the wary distance of strangers, but something quieter. Something that felt for the first time like they might be on the same side. When they reached the house, Silas unsaddled both horses while Clara started supper. The routine was starting to settle in, rough and unpolished. But there. As he walked back toward the house, lamplight spilling out through the window, he realized something had shifted. He still didn't know Clara Whitmore. Not really. But for the first time since Sarah died, he didn't feel alone. And that, more than anything, scared him half to death. The days bled into each other after that, each one measured in sweat and dust and the slow, grinding work of survival. Clara threw herself into ranch life like she was trying to outrun something, and maybe she was. She learned to rope, though her throws went wild more often than not. She learned to brand, holding the iron steady while Silas worked the calf, her face set against the smell of burning hair and hide. She learned which fence posts were rotting, which water troughs needed patching, which cattle were sick and which were just ornery. Silas watched her transform. The blisters on her hands turned to calluses. The sunburn on her face faded to tan. She stopped limping after long rides and started moving with the efficient grace of someone who knew her body could take punishment and keep going. She was still thin, still sharp-edged, but there was a toughness settling into her now, something that went deeper than muscle. They talked more, though neither of them was much for conversation. Mostly it was practical things, where to move the herd, how much hay was left, whether the roof would hold through another storm. But sometimes, in the evenings when the work was done and they sat on the porch watching the light die, the talk drifted into other territory. "You ever think about leaving?" Claire asked one night. She was cleaning her rifle, the one she'd insisted on buying in town with money she wouldn't say where she got. Her hands moved with practiced ease, and Silas wondered where a woman from Philadelphia had learned to handle a gun. "Every winter," he admitted. "When the cold sets in and the cattle start dying and the loneliness gets so thick you can taste it. Yeah, I think about it." "But you stay. Sarah's buried here." He said it quietly, the first time he'd mentioned his first wife by name since Clara arrived. Felt wrong to leave her. Clara was silent for a moment, her hands stilling on the rifle. "You loved her." "I did. I'm sorry." She said it simply, without the kind of pity that would have made him angry. Just 2 words, honest and clean. "What about you?" Silas asked, turning the question around. "You ever think about going back? Every damn day." Clara resumed cleaning the rifle, her jaw tight. "But thinking about it and doing it are different things. There's nothing back there for me except being someone's problem again. Out here, at least the problems are mine to solve." "That what I am? A problem?" She looked up at him then, and there was something almost like amusement in her eyes. "You're a lot of things, Silas Boone. Problem's one of them. But so am I, so I figure we're even." He huffed a sound that might have been a laugh. It felt strange in his chest, like a muscle he'd forgotten how to use. The trouble started 3 weeks after Clara arrived, on a morning that began no different from any other. They were checking the northern fence line when Silas spotted the tracks, deep ruts from wagon wheels, too many hoof prints, all leading away from their land toward the main road. He followed them to the far pasture and felt his stomach drop. 6 head gone. Just gone. Clara rode up beside him, saw the empty space where cattle should have been, and her face went hard. "Rustlers?" "Yeah." "Last night?" "Must have been." Silas dismounted and crouched near the tracks, reading the story written in disturbed earth. 4 riders, maybe 5. They knew what they were doing. Cut the fence clean, drove the cattle out quiet, probably had them halfway to the stockyards before sunrise. Wade's men? Who else? Silas stood, anger and helplessness warring in his chest. Nobody else in the valley would risk it, and even if I could prove it, the sheriff won't touch him. Clara stared at the broken fence, her hands white-knuckled on the saddle horn. So we just let it happen. Unless you got a better idea.
Yeah, she said. I do. We go to town. We file a report whether the sheriff listens or not. We make noise. We make it public. Maybe Wade controls the law, but he doesn't control everyone. Clara, don't. She turned on him, eyes blazing. Don't tell me it's pointless. Don't tell me to keep my head down. You hired me to be your partner, so let me be one. If we roll over every time Wade steals from us, we might as well hand him the deed and walk away.
Silas looked at her, this woman who'd been here less than a month and was already ready to pick a fight with the most dangerous man in the valley. He should have told her no. Should have explained that fighting Wade Cutter wasn't about courage, it was about survival. And survival meant knowing when to bend. But the truth was, he was tired of bending. All right, he said. We go to town. They rode into Red Hollow that afternoon, Clara sitting straight-backed in the saddle, rifle secured across her back like a statement. The town was busy, wagons rolling through, miners and ranchers and drifters moving along the boardwalks. Silas felt eyes on them as they hitched the horses outside the sheriff's office. He heard the whispers, too, about Clara, about her clothes, about the way she carried herself like she thought she had a right to be there. Let them talk. He was past caring. Inside, Sheriff Taggart sat behind his desk, boots propped up, belly straining against his vest. He didn't bother standing when they walked in, just looked up with the lazy interest of a man who already knew he didn't have to care. Silas, Taggart said. Then his eyes slid to Clara, lingering in a way that made Silas's hands curl into fists. And the new missus. Heard you got yourself hitched. 6 head of cattle were stolen from my land last night, Silas said, keeping his voice level. I'm here to file a report. Taggart sighed like this was all very tedious. You see who took 'em? No. Got any proof? Tracks? Broken fence? Timing lines up with when Wade's boys were spotted near my property line 2 days ago. At the mention of Wade's name, Taggart's expression shifted. Not much, but enough. He dropped his boots to the floor and leaned forward. That's a serious accusation, Silas. You better be damn sure before you start throwing names around. I am sure. Then prove it. Taggart spread his hands. Bring me something solid and I'll look into it. But I ain't riding out to Wade Cutter's place on your hunch. Man's got rights, same as you. Clara stepped forward and Silas felt the air in the room change. Rights, she repeated, and there was something cold and cutting in her voice. That's an interesting word coming from a man who seems real selective about who gets to have them. Taggart's face darkened. Lady, you're new here, so I'll give you some advice. Stay out of things you don't understand. Oh, I understand plenty. Clara planted her hands on the desk and leaned in. I understand you're scared of Wade Cutter. I understand every rancher in this valley is getting robbed blind while you sit here collecting a paycheck. And I understand that if you won't do your job, we'll find another way. Clara, Silas said quietly. Not a warning, just her name. Taggart stood up, all pretense of civility gone. You threatening me? I'm telling you the truth. Clara straightened, meeting the sheriff's glare without flinching. Maybe you're not used to hearing it, but rustling is rustling, and theft is theft, and if you won't stop it, then you're just as guilty as the men pulling the trigger. For a moment, Silas thought Taggart might actually do something stupid. The sheriff's hand drifted toward the gun on his hip, his face flushed red. But then someone cleared their throat from the doorway. Morton Gill stood there, the old grain merchant, his face weathered and cautious. Behind him, 2 other men, ranchers Silas recognized but didn't know well. They all looked at Taggart, and then at Silas and Clara, and something unspoken passed between them. Sheriff, Morton said slowly, I'd like to file a report too. Lost 3 head last week. Figured it wasn't worth the trouble, but seeing as Silas is here, might as well make it official. One of the other men nodded. Same. 2 steers gone from my south pasture. Taggart's jaw worked. He looked from face to face, and Silas could see him calculating, weighing risks, trying to figure out how to shut this down without making it worse. Finally, he sat back down and pulled out a ledger with jerky, angry movements. Fine, he bit out. I'll take your reports, but don't expect miracles. Rustlers are hard to catch, and without proof, there's not much I can do. We'll take what we can get, Clara said evenly. They filed the reports. All four of them, spelling out dates and losses and suspicions in language that wouldn't hold up in any court, but at least put words on paper. When it was done, Taggart shoved the ledger back in his desk and waved them out like they were flies he was tired of swatting. Outside, the sunlight felt too bright after the dim interior of the office. Silas nodded to Morton and the others. "Thanks." Morton shrugged. "Wasn't much, but she's right. Keeping quiet hasn't done us any favors." He glanced at Clara with something like approval. "Your wife's got fire, Silas. Don't see that much anymore." Clara gave him a thin smile. "Fire's easy when you've got nothing left to lose." They rode home as the afternoon heat pressed down on them, turning the air thick and heavy. Silas was quiet, mulling over what had happened. Clara had forced something into motion today, though he wasn't sure yet if it was smart or reckless. Maybe both. "You know what you did back there, right?" he said finally. "I made a scene." "You made an enemy." Silas looked at her. "Wade's going to hear about this, and when he does, he's not going to like it." "Good." Claire's voice was flat, uncompromising. "Let him not like it. Let him know we're not going to roll over. Maybe that's the first step to getting him off our backs. Or the first step to getting us killed. Maybe." She turned to him, and her eyes were fierce. "But I'd rather die fighting than live on my knees, Silas. If you can't stomach that, then you married the wrong woman." He held her gaze, and for the first time, he felt something shift inside him. Not attraction exactly, though there was some of that too. Buried under layers of grief and caution, he wasn't ready to unpack. It was something deeper. Respect, maybe. Recognition. Clara Whitmore wasn't just surviving the frontier, she was carving her place into it with bloody hands and a will that wouldn't bend. "I didn't marry the wrong woman," he said quietly. Something flickered across Clara's face, too quick to name. Then she nodded and turned her horse toward home. They didn't have to wait long for Wade's response. 2 days later, Silas was repairing the barn door when he heard the sound of hooves. He straightened, instinct prickling at the back of his neck, and reached for the rifle leaning against the wall. Clara was inside the house, but she must have heard it too because she came out a moment later, her own rifle in hand. 5 riders came over the rise, moving at an easy lope. Silas recognized the lead horse before he saw the man on it. A big bay gelding, expensive and well-fed, the kind of animal that announced money and power. Wade Cutter sat the saddle like he owned the world beneath it, his hat tilted back, his face tanned and hard. He was a big man, thick through the chest and shoulders, with a smile that never reached his eyes. Behind him rode 4 others, cowboys or men who dressed like them. But Silas knew hired muscle when he saw it. These weren't ranch hands, they were enforcers. Wade reined in a few yards from the house, his gaze sweeping the place with casual dismissal. Then his eyes landed on Clara, and his smile widened. "Well now," Wade said, his voice smooth and loud. "This must be the new bride. Heard Silas got himself hitched to some eastern gal. Didn't expect her to be so easy on the eyes." Clara didn't respond. She just stood there, rifle held loose but ready, her face empty of expression. Wade's smile tightened a fraction. "Got a tongue in that head, sweetheart?" "She's got one," Silas said, stepping forward. "But she's smart enough not to waste it on men who don't matter." Wade's attention shifted to Silas, and the pretense of friendliness dropped away like a mask. "Careful, Boone, you're in enough trouble without running your mouth." "I didn't start any trouble." "You did." "Did I?" Wade leaned forward in the saddle, his hands resting on the pommel. "I heard you went crying to the sheriff about some missing cattle. That true?" "I filed a report, legal and proper." "Huh." Wade made a show of thinking it over. "See, that's interesting, because I got no idea what you're talking about. My men were nowhere near your land, but you accusing me in public like that? Well, that damages my reputation. Makes people think I'm the kind of man who'd steal from his neighbors." "If the boot fits," Clara said. Wade's head snapped toward her, and this time there was no smile at all. "You got a problem with me, girl?" "I've got a problem with thieves and bullies," Clara said evenly. "And from where I'm standing, you're both." One of Wade's men snickered. Wade silenced him with a look, then turned back to Clara, his eyes flat and cold. "You're new here, so maybe you don't understand how things work. This valley's got rules. Everybody pays their share. Everybody stays in line. You break the rules, you pay the price." What price? Silas asked, stepping between Wade and Clara. More stolen cattle? Burned barns? You going to run us off like you did the Harpers? Harpers left because they couldn't make it work, Wade said. Same as a dozen others. Frontier's hard, Silas. Not everyone's cut out for it. Especially when someone's making it harder. Wade's jaw tightened. He straightened in the saddle and his hand drifted toward the gun on his hip. Silas felt his own hand tighten on the rifle, and out of the corner of his eye he saw Clara shift her stance, ready. For a long, breathless moment, nobody moved. The air felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Then Wade smiled again, slow and ugly. I like you, Silas, he said. Always have. Hardworking, keeps to himself, doesn't cause problems. But your wife here, she's got a mouth that's going to get you both hurt. He paused, letting the words sink in. I'll give you one chance. Drop the accusations. Apologize for wasting the sheriff's time. And make sure your pretty little wife learns to keep quiet. You do that, and we'll call this settled. And if we don't? Clara asked. Wade looked at her like she was something stuck to his boot. Then you'll learn the hard way. And trust me, sweetheart, you won't like the lesson. He yanked the reins, turning his horse. His men followed, and they rode off the way they'd come, kicking up dust that hung in the air long after they disappeared over the ridge. Silas let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His hands were shaking, adrenaline still buzzing under his skin. He turned to Clara and saw the same tension in her, the same barely controlled fury. We should have shot him, she said quietly. Can't shoot a man for making threats. Why not? Because that's murder, Clara, and murder gets you hanged, even if the man deserved it. She looked at him, and there was something bleak in her eyes. So we wait until he does worse. Yeah. Silas felt the weight of it, the helplessness that had been eating at him for years. We wait. But waiting turned out to be harder than either of them expected. The next week brought more trouble. A fence cut in 3 places, 2 more cattle missing, and a fire that started in the dry grass near the barn. Silas caught it early, managed to beat it out before it spread, but the message was clear. Wade was done talking. The other ranchers were feeling it too. Silas heard stories in town, cattle gone, equipment stolen, threats delivered in the middle of the night. Fear was settling over the valley like frost, and people were starting to make decisions. A few packed up and left. Others paid Wade's fees and kept their heads down, hoping appeasement would buy them peace. Silas and Clara did neither. They worked longer hours, slept in shifts, kept the rifles close. Clara took to the work like she was born to it, her instincts sharp, her determination unshakable. She patched the fences, moved the herd closer to the house, and started riding the property line at night, watching for movement in the dark. One night, Silas found her on the porch, rifle across her lap, staring out at the empty land. He sat down beside her, and for a while they just listened to the sound of the wind and the distant cry of a coyote. You're not scared, Silas said. It wasn't a question. I'm terrified, Clara said, but scared and stupid are different things. I won't let fear make my decisions. What about survival? Survival's the only decision I've ever made. She glanced at him. What about you? You scared? Yeah. He said it simply, honestly. But I'm tired of being pushed around, and I'm tired of doing this alone. Clara was quiet for a moment, then she said, You're not alone anymore. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the truth in her face. She wasn't just saying it to be kind or because it was expected. She meant it. Somewhere in the past few weeks, between the work and the fights and the quiet moments on this porch, they'd become something more than a contract. They'd become a partnership. I know, Silas said. And that night, for the first time since Sarah died, he slept in the house instead of the barn. He took the bed in the main room, giving Clara the privacy of the other, but the walls were thin and he could hear her breathing. It was strange and comforting all at once, knowing she was there, knowing he wasn't facing the darkness alone. The storm finally broke a week later, and when it did, it came fast and ugly. Silas was in town getting supplies when he heard the shouting. He came around the corner and saw a crowd gathered near the saloon. In the center of it, Wade Cutter stood over a man on the ground. Tom Dunner, one of the northern ranchers, blood streaming from his nose. You don't get to say no, Wade was saying, his voice loud and hard. Not to me. Not in my valley. Tom tried to get up, and Wade kicked him back down. The crowd watched, some looking away, Some staring with the sick fascination people have for violence, they're too scared to stop. Silas pushed through the crowd. Wade. Wade turned and his face split into that same empty smile. Silas, come to watch. Come to stop this. Stop what? Just having a conversation with Tom here about water rights. Man seems confused about how things work. Wade looked down at Tom. Aren't you confused, Tom? Tom spat blood and didn't answer. Silas stepped between them. Walk away, Wade. Or what? Wade's smile vanished. You going to stop me? You and what army? He's not alone. The voice came from behind Silas. He turned and saw Clara standing at the edge of the crowd, rifle in hand. And beside her, Morton Gill. And beside him, 2 more ranchers. Then another. Then another. One by one, men who'd kept quiet for years stepped forward, not saying a word, just standing there. A dozen of them. Then more. Wade looked around, and for the first time, Silas saw something like uncertainty in his face. This is none of your business. It's all our business, Morton said. You've been bleeding us dry for years, Wade. Stealing our stock, threatening our families, hiding behind the law. We're done. Done? Wade laughed, but it sounded forced. You think a bunch of dirt farmers can stand against me? I own this valley. I own the water, the land, the sheriff. You're nothing. Maybe, Silas said. But there's a lot more of us than there are of you. Wade's men shifted nervously. They were outnumbered now, and they knew it. Wade saw it too. His face darkened, and his hand went to his gun. Clara raised the rifle, not pointing it at him, but making it clear she could. Don't, she said quietly. Wade stared at her, and Silas could see the rage burning behind his eyes. But he wasn't stupid. Not stupid enough to draw on a woman with a rifle when he was surrounded by angry ranchers. Slowly, he raised his hands and stepped back. This isn't over, he said. Yeah, Silas said. It is. Wade turned and walked to his horse. His men followed, mounting up, and they rode out of town in silence. The crowd watched them go, and then someone started talking, and then everyone was talking, the tension breaking like a dam. Silas helped Tom Dunner to his feet. Clara came over, lowering the rifle, her face pale but composed. You all right? Silas asked her. Ask me tomorrow, she said. That night back at the ranch, they sat on the porch again. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Clara said, We made an enemy for life today. We had one already. Now it's worse. Maybe. Silas looked at her. But we stood up. We fought back. That's something. Clara nodded slowly. Then she smiled just a little. Yeah, it is. They sat in the dark, shoulder to shoulder, and for the first time since this all started, Silas felt something that wasn't fear or anger or grief. He felt alive. And beside him, Clara Whitmore, stubborn, reckless, impossibly brave, felt like something he hadn't known he was looking for. She felt like home. The peace didn't last. Silas knew it wouldn't, but some part of him had hoped Wade would take the hint and back off, let things settle. That hope died 3 nights later when the gunshots woke them. Clara was on her feet before Silas even processed the sound, rifle in hand, moving toward the window with the kind of speed that came from sleeping with one eye open. Silas grabbed his own gun and followed, his heart hammering against his ribs. Outside, the darkness was broken by muzzle flashes near the southern pasture. Riders, maybe 3 or 4, firing into the air and whooping like this was all some kind of game. The cattle were scattering, their panicked bellowing cutting through the night. They're driving them off, Clara said, her voice tight. Silas was already moving. He shoved his feet into his boots, didn't bother with a shirt, just ran for the door. Clara was right behind him. They got to the corral as the riders disappeared over the ridge, taking half the herd with them. The remaining cattle milled around in confusion, eyes rolling white in the moonlight. Silas counted heads and felt his stomach turn. 15 gone. Maybe more. Son of a... He didn't finish, just stood there, breathing hard, rage and helplessness churning in his gut. Clara was already saddling her horse. We go after them. It's too dark. We don't know how many there are. So we let them get away? We stay alive. Silas grabbed her arm. Clara, they want us to follow. They want us out there in the dark where they can pick us off. We go now. We're dead. She yanked her arm free, her eyes blazing. Then what do we do, Silas? Just stand here and take it? We wait until sunrise. We track them. We do it smart. Smart. She spat the word like it tasted bad. Smart hasn't gotten us anywhere. It's kept us breathing. He met her glare and held it. I know you want to fight. So do I. But fighting stupid is the same as dying, and I won't let you throw your life away because you're angry. For a moment, he thought she might hit him. Her whole body was wound tight, trembling with the need to do something, anything. Then she turned away, her hands clenched around the rifle so hard her knuckles went white. Fine, she said. We wait. They spent what was left of the night taking inventory, moving the remaining cattle closer to the house, checking every shadow for movement. By the time the sun came up, Silas was exhausted, and Clara looked like she might shatter if anyone touched her. They rode out at first light, following the track south. The rustlers hadn't bothered hiding their trail, deep ruts in the dirt, scattered droppings, broken brush where the herd had been pushed through. It led toward the main road, then veered east into rougher country. They're heading for the border, Silas said. Probably got a buyer across the line. By the time we get there, the herd will be scattered and sold off. So we lose them. Yeah. Clara reined in her horse, staring at the empty horizon. How many times, Silas? How many times do we lose before we stop losing? I don't know. He wished he had a better answer. Wished he could promise her things would get better, that standing up to Wade had meant something. But the truth was, all they'd done was make him angrier. They rode back in silence. When they got to the ranch, Morton Gill was waiting in the yard, his face grim. Heard the shots last night, Morton said. Figured I'd come check. You all right? 15 head gone, Silas said, dismounting. Maybe more. Morton swore under his breath. Tom Dunner lost cattle last night too, and the Crays. Wade's hitting everyone who stood with you in town. Retaliation, Clara said flatly. Call it what you want. Point is, he's making an example. Morton looked between them. Some folks are saying we should have kept quiet. That you two stirred up trouble that didn't need stirring. Silas felt anger flare hot in his chest. So we should have just let him rob us blind? I'm not saying that. I'm saying people are scared. And scared people look for someone to blame. Let them blame us, Clara said. At least we're doing something. Are you? Morton's voice was sharp. Because from where I'm standing, all we're doing is bleeding. Wade's got more men, more money, and the law in his pocket. What do we have? A dozen ranchers who can barely afford to lose what they're losing. We have each other, Silas said. That enough to stop bullets? Silas didn't have an answer for that. Morton left, and the day dragged on, heavy with the weight of what they'd lost and what they still stood to lose. Clara threw herself into work, mucking stalls, hauling water, anything to keep moving. Silas watched her and saw the cracks forming, the way her hands shook when she thought no one was looking, the tightness around her mouth. That night, she didn't come in for supper. Silas found her in the barn, sitting on a hay bale, the rifle across her knees. She wasn't crying, but her face was drawn and pale. You should eat, Silas said. I'm not hungry. He sat down beside her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Clara said, I thought it would be different out here. Different how? I thought if I worked hard enough, if I was tough enough, I could make a life that was mine, that nobody could take away. She laughed, a bitter sound. Turns out it doesn't matter where you go. There's always someone bigger and meaner ready to take what you've got. That's not true, isn't it? She looked at him. We're losing, Silas. Slowly, piece by piece, Wade's taking everything. And you know what the worst part is? I don't know how to stop him. I don't know how to fight someone who doesn't play by any rules. Silas took a breath. You remember what you told me that first week? About how you'd rather die fighting than live on your knees? Yeah, I didn't believe you then. Thought you were just talking the way people do when they're trying to sound brave. He turned to face her. But you meant it. And watching you these past weeks, seeing you stand up when everyone else wanted to run, it made me believe it too. So yeah, we're losing. Maybe we'll keep losing. But at least we're still standing. That's got to count for something. Clara was quiet, her eyes fixed on the rifle in her lap. Then she said, What if standing isn't enough? Then we figure out what is. She looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. The hardness was still there, but underneath it, he saw something raw and uncertain. Something that looked like hope, even if she didn't want to admit it. You really think we can beat him? She asked. I think we can try.
That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. He reached over and covered her hand with his. Her fingers were cold, and after a moment, they curled around his, holding tight. They sat like that until the light outside faded to black, and when they finally went back to the house, something between them had changed. It wasn't loud or obvious, just a shift in the way they moved around each other, the way their eyes met across the table. The distance was closing, inch by inch. The valley got darker after that. More cattle went missing. Fences were cut. A barn burned on the Cray property, and by the time anyone got there, it was nothing but ash and blackened timber. The fear was spreading, thick and choking, and people started talking about giving up. Silas and Clara held on. They worked harder, slept less, kept the guns close. And slowly they started to notice something. Other ranchers were doing the same. Tom Dunner started riding his property line at night. The Crays posted guards. Morton organized a rotation so that someone was always watching the roads leading in and out of the valley. It wasn't much, but it was something. One afternoon, Clara rode into town to pick up supplies and came back with news. "Wade's hiring more men," she said, unloading flour and beans from the saddlebags. "I heard talk at the general store. He's bringing in guns from out of territory, planning something big." "How big?" "Big enough that people are scared to say it out loud." She set the last bag down and looked at him. "Silas, if he's bringing in outside help, it means he's done playing games. He's going to come at us hard. Then we need to be ready." "How? We're barely holding on as it is." Silas thought about it. Thought about Wade's men, about the fear in the valley, about the ranchers who wanted to fight but didn't know how. Then he thought about something Clara had said weeks ago, about fighting smart instead of fighting scared. "We call a meeting," he said. "Everyone who's willing to stand. We pool what we've got, share information, figure out a plan. You think anyone will come?" "I think they're tired of being afraid." He met her eyes. "And I think they're tired of Wade Cutter deciding how they live." Clara nodded slowly. "All right, let's do it." They sent word through Morton, and 3 nights later a dozen men gathered in the Boone barn. It wasn't many, but it was more than Silas had hoped for. Ranchers mostly, weathered and hard-eyed, carrying the kind of anger that comes from having nothing left to lose. Tom Dunner was there, his face still bruised from Wade's beating. The Cray brothers. A few others Silas knew by name, but not much else. Clara stood beside Silas as he addressed the group. "Thanks for coming," Silas said. "I know this isn't easy, but we can't keep bleeding the way we have been. Wade's getting bolder, and if we don't do something, we're all going to lose everything." "So what do you suggest?" Tom asked. "We can't fight him head on. He's got too many men." "We don't fight him head on," Clara said. "We fight him smart. We watch his movements, track his men, find out where he's keeping the stolen cattle. Then we take it to the authorities outside the valley. The sheriff here won't help, but there are marshals in the territory. They'll listen if we bring them proof. And if Wade finds out we're gathering evidence, what, Tom?" One of the Cray brothers asked. "Then we fight," Silas said simply. "But we do it together. No more getting picked off one by one. We watch each other's backs, we share information, we make it so Wade can't move without us knowing about it." There was silence for a moment. Then Morton spoke up. "It's risky." "So is doing nothing," Clara said. Tom nodded slowly. "I'm in. Wade already beat the hell out of me. Can't get much worse." One by one, the others agreed. It wasn't unanimous, and Silas could see the doubt on some faces, but it was enough. They had a plan. They had people willing to fight. Now they just had to survive long enough to see it through. The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. They organized patrols, set up signals, gunshots in specific patterns that meant trouble, smoke during the day, lanterns at night. Clara rode between properties, carrying messages, coordinating efforts. She was good at it, Silas realized. She had a way of talking to people that made them believe things might actually work out. At night, back at the ranch, they fell into a rhythm. Supper together, quiet conversation, then Clara would clean the dishes while Silas checked the perimeter. When he came back in, she'd be sitting at the table writing in a small journal she kept. He never asked what she wrote. It felt private, like something she needed to keep for herself. But one night she looked up and caught him watching. "What?" "Nothing." He pulled off his boots and set them by the door. "Just thinking." About how different things are now." He sat down across from her.
When you first got here, I didn't think it would work. Thought you'd last maybe a month before you got fed up and left. I thought the same thing about you, Clara admitted. Thought you'd regret sending for me the minute I opened my mouth. I did regret it. Silas smiled a little. For about 5 minutes. Clara laughed, soft and surprised. What changed? You did. He said it simply. You didn't try to be something you weren't. You just dug in and worked. And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as a stranger and started seeing you as... He trailed off, not sure how to finish. Clara waited, her eyes steady on his. As what? She asked quietly. As someone I don't want to lose. The words hung between them, heavy and real. Clara's expression shifted, something softening in her face. She reached across the table and took his hand, her grip firm and warm. You won't lose me, she said. I'm not going anywhere. Silas looked down at their joined hands and felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd kept locked down since Sarah died. He'd thought he was done with this, with feeling anything for anyone. But Clara had slipped past every wall he'd built, and now she was there, solid and real, and he didn't know how to handle it. Clara, he started, but she squeezed his hand, stopping him. You don't have to say anything, she said. I know what this is. I know we're not... She hesitated. We're not like other married people. But whatever this is, it's enough. For now. He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her it was more than enough. That somewhere between the fights and the fear and the long nights watching the dark, he'd started to care about her in ways that went past partnership and straight into dangerous territory. But the words stuck in his throat, so he just nodded. That night, for the first time, Clara didn't go to her room. She stayed in the main room, sitting by the fire, and Silas stayed with her. They didn't talk much, just sat close, shoulders touching, and watched the flames burn down to embers. When they finally went to bed, Silas lay awake for a long time, listening to the sound of her breathing in the next room, and tried to figure out when exactly his life had stopped being about survival and started being about her. The answer came 2 days later, sharp and brutal. They were checking the northern herd when they heard the gunfire. Not random shots this time, deliberate, sustained, coming from the direction of the Dunner place. Silas and Clara looked at each other for half a second, then kicked their horses into a run. They reached the Dunner ranch to find it under attack. 4 riders were circling the house, firing through the windows, while Tom and his son returned fire from inside. Smoke was rising from the barn. Someone had set it ablaze. Silas didn't think. He just pulled his rifle and started shooting. Clara did the same, and the sudden attack from their flank caught the riders off guard. One went down, his horse bolting. Another wheeled around, firing back, but Clara's shot caught him in the shoulder and he dropped his gun. The remaining 2 riders took off, and Silas let them go. He dismounted and ran to the house. Tom stumbled out, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, his son right behind him, pale but unhurt. You all right? Silas asked. We will be. Tom wiped the blood from his face, his hands shaking. They came out of nowhere. Said Wade sent them to deliver a message. What message? That anyone who stands with you is next. Clara came up beside Silas, her face white but composed. We need to move. If they're hitting Tom, they'll hit others. She was right. Over the next 3 days, Wade's men struck 4 more ranches. Nobody was killed, but the damage was done. Burned buildings, stolen livestock, families terrorized in the middle of the night. The valley was coming apart at the seams, and the fragile alliance Silas and Clara had built was starting to crack under the weight of fear. But then something unexpected happened. On the 4th night, as Silas and Clara were riding back from the Cray place, they saw riders coming toward them. Silas tensed, reaching for his gun, but Clara put a hand on his arm. Wait, she said. The riders got closer, and Silas recognized them, ranchers from the meeting, along with a few others he hadn't seen before. Morton was in the lead, and his face was set in hard lines. We're done hiding, Morton said without preamble. Tom's barn burned. The Wills family got run off their land. Wade's not stopping, and we're tired of taking it. What are you saying? Silas asked. We're saying it's time to end this. Morton looked around at the others, and they all nodded. We've been gathering evidence like you said. We know where Wade's keeping the stolen cattle. There's a canyon on the far edge of his property. We've got witnesses who will testify about the beatings and the threats. We've got enough to bring in a marshal, but we need to act fast before Wade realizes what we're doing. Clara sat forward in her saddle. What do you need from us? We need someone to ride to the territorial capital and bring back help. Someone Wade won't expect. Morton looked at Clara. We need you. Silas's stomach dropped. Absolutely not. Silas, Clara started. No. He turned to her, his voice tight. You're not riding halfway across the territory alone. It's too dangerous. I can handle it. I don't care if you can handle it. I'm not letting you go. Claire's eyes flashed. You're not letting me? Since when do you get to decide what I do? Since I married you and promised to keep you safe. I didn't ask for your protection, Silas. I asked for your partnership, and right now the partnership needs me to go. They stared at each other, the argument crackling between them like live wire. The other ranchers shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. Finally, Morton cleared his throat. Maybe we should... I'll go, Clara said, not breaking eye contact with Silas. But I'm not going alone. Someone comes with me. 2 riders are safer than 1. I'll go, Tom's son spoke up. My paw is hurt. I can ride. Silas wanted to argue more, wanted to grab Clara and make her understand how much the thought of her riding into danger twisted his gut. But he could see the determination in her face, the same stubborn fire that had carried her through everything else. She wasn't going to back down. And maybe, deep down, he knew she was right. Fine, he said roughly. But you leave at first light, and you don't stop for anything. You get to the capital, you find a marshal, and you come straight back. Understand? Understood. That night, they prepared for the journey in tense silence. Clara packed supplies, checked her rifle, made sure her horse was sound. Silas watched her, his chest tight with a fear he couldn't name. When everything was ready, Clara finally stopped and looked at him. Say it. Say what? Whatever you're thinking so hard about, say it. Silas took a breath. I'm scared I'm going to lose you. Clara crossed the space between them and put her hands on his chest. You won't. You don't know that. No, she agreed. But I'm good at surviving, Silas. It's what I do best. He covered her hands with his, holding them there. When you come back... When I come back, she interrupted, we're going to finish this. Wade, the fear, all of it. And then we're going to figure out what the hell we are to each other. Deal? He nodded, not trusting his voice. Clara leaned up and kissed him, quick and hard, her lips pressing against his with something that felt like desperation and promise all mixed together. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. Don't die while I'm gone, she said. Same to you. She smiled small and fierce. Then she turned and walked out into the night to get some sleep before the ride. Silas stood there in the empty house, his lips still tingling from that kiss, and realized with absolute clarity that he'd fallen in love with his wife. Somewhere between the fights and the fear and the endless work, Clara Whitmore had stopped being a contract and started being everything that mattered. And tomorrow she was riding into danger, and all he could do was wait and hope she made it back alive. Clara left before dawn, riding out with young Peter Dunner beside her, both of them carrying rifles and enough supplies for 3 days' hard travel. Silas watched them disappear into the gray morning light and felt something hollow open up in his chest. He stood there long after they were gone, the cold air biting at his skin, trying to convince himself she'd come back. He had work to do. They all did. While Clara rode for help, the rest of them had to keep Wade's attention split, keep him from realizing what they were planning. Morton organized rotating patrols, 2 men to a shift, watching the roads and the valley approaches. Tom Dunner, despite his injuries, insisted on taking a turn. The Cray brothers set up observation posts on the high ground overlooking Wade's property. Silas threw himself into the work, anything to keep his mind off Clara. He rode fence lines, checked cattle, helped Morton repair a wagon axle that had cracked. But every time a rider appeared on the horizon, his heart jumped into his throat, hoping it was her coming back early, safe. It never was. The second night without her, Silas couldn't sleep. He paced the empty house, the silence pressing in on him like a physical weight. The bed in the other room was still rumpled from where Clara had slept, and he found himself standing in the doorway, staring at it like an idiot. He'd lost Sarah to fever, helpless to do anything but watch her slip away. The grief had nearly killed him. He'd sworn after that he wouldn't let anyone get close enough to hurt him that way again. But Clara had gotten close anyway, without him even noticing, and now the thought of losing her made it hard to breathe. A knock at the door pulled him out of his spiral. He grabbed his rifle and opened it to find Morton standing there, hat in hand, looking older than Silas had ever seen him. "Got word from the Wills place," Morton said. "Wade's men hit them again tonight. Burned what was left of their house. Families packing up, leaving the valley for good." Silas felt his jaw tighten. "How many does that make?" "3 families gone in the last month. More talking about it." Morton stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "People are scared, Silas. Real scared. They're starting to wonder if Claire's going to make it back at all, or if we're all just waiting around to get picked off one by one." "She'll make it back." "You sure about that?" "I have to be." Silas set the rifle down, his hands clenching into fists. "Because if she doesn't, then none of this matters. Wade wins. We all lose. And I can't—" His voice cracked. He stopped, got control of it. "I can't live with that." Morton was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You love her." It wasn't a question. Silas didn't bother denying it. "Yeah." "She know?" "I don't know, maybe." Silas ran a hand through his hair. "We kissed before she left. First time I've kissed anyone since Sarah. Felt like stepping off a cliff." "Love usually does." Morton pulled out a flask and took a drink, then offered it to Silas. "For what it's worth, I think she loves you too. Way she looks at you when she thinks nobody's watching. Way she fights for this place like it's hers. That's not duty. That's something else." Silas took the flask and drank. The whiskey burned going down, but it cut through the fear a little. "Doesn't matter if we're all dead." "Then we make sure we're not." Morton took the flask back. "Wade thinks he's broken us. Let him think that. When Clara gets back with the marshal, we hit him hard and fast. No more playing defense. We end this." "And if Clara doesn't make it back?" Morton met his eyes. "Then we fight anyway. Because that's what she'd want. That's what she'd do." He was right. Clara would fight until her last breath, and she'd expect Silas to do the same. So that's what he'd do, even if it killed him. The third day dragged by like pulling teeth. Silas rode out to check the northern herd and found 2 more steers missing. Fresh tracks led west toward Wade's territory, deliberate and obvious. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. He was heading back when he saw smoke rising from the direction of the Cray place. His gut clenched. He kicked his horse into a gallop and arrived to find the barn fully engulfed, flames licking at the sky. The Cray brothers were hauling water from the well, fighting a losing battle. Silas jumped down and joined them, grabbing a bucket, throwing water on the flames until his shoulders screamed and his lungs burned from the smoke. Other ranchers showed up. Morton and Tom and a few others, all of them working together to keep the fire from spreading to the house. By the time they got it under control, the barn was gone. Just a smoking skeleton of charred wood and ash. The younger Cray brother sat on the ground, his face black with soot, staring at the ruins. "They rode up bold as you please," he said, his voice flat. "Middle of the day. 4 of Wade's men. Told us this was a warning. Said next time it'd be the house with us inside." "Did you recognize them?" Silas asked. "Yeah, that big one Wade keeps around, the one with the scar on his neck, and 3 others I've seen in town." Morton swore under his breath. "He's not even hiding it anymore. He knows we can't touch him." "Not yet," Silas said. "But Clara's coming back, and when she does, we'll have the law on our side." "If she comes back," the younger Cray said bitterly. "No offense, Silas, but your wife's been gone 3 days. Anything could have happened." Silas felt anger flare hot and sharp. "She's coming back." "You don't know that." "I know her." Silas stepped forward, his voice hard. "Clara Whitmore doesn't quit. She doesn't run. And she sure as hell doesn't fail. So yeah, she's coming back. And when she does, we're going to make Wade Cutter pay for every bit of hell he's put us through." The younger Cray looked away, but Silas could see the doubt in his face. Hell, he could see it in all their faces. They wanted to believe, but belief was a luxury when you were losing everything. That night, Silas sat on his porch alone and stared at the dark horizon. 4 days now. Clara should have reached the capital by yesterday. If everything went right, she'd be on her way back with help. But a lot could go wrong in 4 days. Ambush, injury, getting lost, or worse. He tried not to think about worse. Instead, he thought about that kiss. The way she'd grabbed his shirt and pulled him down, fierce and sudden, like she needed to make sure he remembered her. The way her lips had felt against his, warm and alive. The way his whole world had narrowed down to that single point of contact and everything else had fallen away. He wanted more of that, wanted to kiss her slow and careful without the shadow of death hanging over them. Wanted to wake up next to her and see what she looked like in the morning light. Wanted to build something real with her, something that wasn't just survival. But first, she had to come back. The 5th day brought more bad news. Someone had poisoned the creek that fed into the eastern pastures. 3 cattle dead, 2 more sick. Silas spent hours hauling the carcasses away from the water, his back screaming, his hands raw. Morton helped, and they worked in grim silence. "This is getting out of hand," Morton said finally. "Wade's not just squeezing anymore. He's trying to wipe us out." So we hit back.
With what? We're barely holding on, Silas. Half the men are talking about leaving. The other half are too scared to do anything but hide. Silas straightened, wiping sweat from his face. Then we remind them what we're fighting for. We remind them that this is our land, our homes, our lives. And we remind them that Clara's risking everything to bring back help. We owe it to her to hold on. Morton looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right, I'll spread the word." We hold. That evening, Silas was checking the horses when he heard riders approaching fast. His hand went to his gun, but then he recognized the horse in the lead. His heart nearly stopped. Clara. She rode into the yard like a storm, Peter Dunner right behind her, both of them covered in dust and exhaustion. But she was alive. She was here. Silas ran to her as she dismounted, and before he could think about it, he grabbed her and pulled her into his arms. Clara went stiff for half a second, then melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt. "I made it," she said against his chest, her voice hoarse. "I can see that." He pulled back just enough to look at her face. She had a bruise on her cheek and a cut above her eyebrow, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. "What happened?" "Ran into trouble on the way back. Wade's men were watching the road. We had to take the long way through the hills." She swayed a little, and Silas steadied her. "But we made it, and I brought help." "Where?" "Half a day behind us, Marshal Cooper and 6 deputies. I told them everything, the rustling, the threats, the attacks. They're coming to make arrests." Relief hit Silas so hard he felt lightheaded. "You did it." "We did it." Clara looked up at him, and there was something fierce and bright in her eyes. "Now we finish this." Word spread fast. By nightfall, every rancher in the valley knew help was coming. The mood shifted from desperation to something harder, sharper. People who'd been talking about leaving started talking about fighting. Guns were cleaned, ammunition was counted, plans were made. Silas called a meeting in his barn, and this time nearly 20 men showed up. Clara stood beside him, still dusty from the road, and told them what to expect. "Marshal Cooper's bringing a warrant for Wade's arrest," she said. "Rustling, intimidation, destruction of property. We've got enough testimony to put him away for years. But he's not going to come quietly. He's got men, and they're loyal. So when the marshal moves in, we need to be ready to back him up." "What's the plan?" Tom Dunner asked. "We surround Wade's property at first light, cut off his escape routes. The marshal will ride in and serve the warrant. If Wade's smart, he'll surrender. If he's not, then we fight." Clara's voice was steady, but Silas could see the tension in her shoulders. "Either way, this ends tomorrow." There was silence as the weight of it settled in. Then Morton spoke up. "About damn time." The others murmured agreement. They were tired of running, tired of losing, tired of being afraid. Tomorrow, one way or another, it would be over. After the meeting, Silas and Clara walked back to the house together. The night was cold and clear, stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. Clara moved stiffly, favoring her left side, and Silas noticed her wince when she took the porch steps. "You're hurt," he said. "I'm fine." "Clara," she sighed, "took a fall when Wade's men chased us through the rocks. Bruised a rib, maybe cracked it. Nothing I can't handle." Silas wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she should rest, but he knew it wouldn't do any good. So instead, he just followed her inside and lit the lamps while she collapsed into a chair at the table. For a long moment, they just sat there, the silence stretching between them. Then Clara said, "I thought about you the whole ride." Silas looked up. "Yeah?" "Yeah.
Every time I got scared, every time I wanted to turn back, I thought about you waiting here. Thought about that kiss." She smiled a little. "Figured if I died before I got to do that again, I'd be pretty mad about it." Something tight in Silas's chest loosened. "Guess you'll get another chance then." "Not tonight." Clara's smile turned wry. "Tonight I'm too tired to do anything but sleep. But tomorrow, after this is done, I'm holding you to that." "Deal." She stood, wincing again, and started toward her room. Then she stopped and turned back. "Silas?" "Yeah? I'm glad I came here. I'm glad I met you. Whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know that." Silas felt his throat tighten. "I'm glad too." Clara nodded, then disappeared into her room, closing the door softly behind her. Silas sat there in the lamplight, his heart pounding, and tried to figure out how he'd gotten so damn lucky. She was reckless and stubborn and half crazy, and she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. He just had to make sure they both lived long enough to figure out what came next. Morning came cold and gray. Silas woke before dawn, adrenaline already buzzing under his skin. He dressed, checked his rifle, and found Clara already up, moving quietly around the kitchen. She'd changed into men's trousers again and tied her hair back tight. She looked pale but determined. "You ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be." They ate a quick breakfast in silence, then headed out to meet the others. The marshal and his deputies had arrived during the night and set up camp a mile outside Wade's property. Marshal Cooper was a lean, hard-eyed man in his 50s with silver hair and a no-nonsense manner. He listened as Silas and Morton explained the layout of Wade's ranch, nodding occasionally, asking sharp questions. "We go in at first light," Cooper said. "I'll serve the warrant. My deputies will cover the exits. You ranchers stay back unless shooting starts. If it does, you follow my orders. This is a legal operation, not a vigilante raid. Understood?" Everyone nodded. Silas glanced at Clara and saw the tension in her jaw. She wanted to be in the front, wanted to see Wade's face when he fell. But she stayed quiet, and Silas was grateful for it. They moved out in this pre-dawn darkness, spreading out around Wade's property in a loose circle. Silas and Clara took up position on the eastern approach with Morton and Tom. From their vantage point, they could see the main house, the barn, and the corrals. Lights were on inside the house. Wade was awake. The sun crept over the horizon, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. Marshal Cooper rode forward with 2 deputies flanking him. They stopped at the edge of Wade's yard, and Cooper called out, "Wade Cutter, this is Marshal Cooper of the Territorial Authority. I have a warrant for your arrest. Come out with your hands up." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the front door opened and Wade stepped out onto the porch. He wasn't armed, at least not visibly, but he didn't look worried either. He looked annoyed. "Marshal," Wade called back, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. You're under arrest for cattle rustling, destruction of property, and criminal intimidation. You can come quietly, or we can do this the hard way." Wade laughed, a cold, ugly sound. "You really think you can arrest me? I own this valley, Marshal. I own the land, the water, the people. You ride in here with your fancy warrant and think that changes anything?" "The law says it does." "The law," Wade repeated, shaking his head. "The law is whatever I say it is." He raised his hand and suddenly men poured out of the barn, the bunkhouse, from behind the corrals. At least a dozen of them, all armed, all spreading out to surround the marshal and his deputies. Silas's blood went cold. Son of a... He was ready for this. Cooper didn't flinch. "Last chance, Wade. Surrender or face the consequences." Wade's smile widened. "I think you're the one facing consequences, Marshal." Then everything went to hell. One of Wade's men fired first, a shot that kicked up dirt near the marshal's horse. Cooper's deputies returned fire, and suddenly the whole valley erupted in gunfire. Silas saw Cooper's horse rear, saw the marshal dismount and take cover behind a water trough, saw his deputies scrambling for position. "Now!" Morton shouted, and the ranchers opened fire from their positions. Silas aimed for one of Wade's men and squeezed the trigger. The man went down. Beside him, Clara was shooting with calm precision, her face set in hard lines. Bullets whined through the air, thudding into wood and dirt. Wade's men scattered, some running for cover, others returning fire. The fight spread across the property, chaos and smoke, and the crack of rifles. Silas saw Tom Dunner charge forward with 3 other ranchers, driving Wade's men back toward the barn. saw one of the deputies go down, clutching his leg. And through it all, Wade stood on his porch, untouched, watching his empire crumble. Then Clara did something Silas would remember for the rest of his life. She stood up, just stood up from their cover and started walking toward Wade's house, rifle in hand, moving through the gunfire like it didn't exist. Bullets kicked up dirt around her feet, zinged past her head, but she didn't flinch. She just kept walking, her eyes locked on Wade. "Clara!" Silas shouted, but she didn't stop. He ran after her, heart in his throat, firing at anyone who aimed at her. Morton and Tom saw what was happening and laid down covering fire, driving Wade's men back. Clara reached the porch and climbed the steps, her rifle coming up to point directly at Wade's chest. Wade's smile finally died. He reached for his gun, but Clara was faster. She fired, and the bullet punched through his shoulder, spinning him around. He hit the porch railing and collapsed, his gun falling from nerveless fingers. Clara stood over him, breathing hard. "You lose." Wade looked up at her, blood spreading across his shirt, and for the first time Silas saw fear in his eyes. "You crazy—" "Maybe." Clara didn't lower the rifle. "But I'm still standing. You're not." The gunfire was dying down now. Wade's men were surrendering, throwing down their weapons as the marshal and the ranchers closed in. It was over. The fight, the fear, all of it, over. Silas reached Clara's side and she finally lowered the rifle, her hands shaking. He wanted to yell at her for being reckless, for nearly getting herself killed, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just pulled her against him and held on. "Don't ever do that again," he said roughly. "Can't promise that." But her voice was shaking too. Marshal Cooper climbed the steps, holstering his gun. He looked at Wade, then at Clara, and shook his head. "Ma'am, that was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever seen." "Probably both," Clara admitted. Cooper almost smiled. Then he crouched beside Wade and slapped handcuffs on him. "Wade Cutter, you're under arrest. You have the right to—" "I know my damn rights," Wade spat. They hauled him up, and as they led him away, he looked back at Clara and Silas with pure hatred burning in his eyes. "This isn't over." "Yeah," Clara said, "it is." And watching Wade stumble down the steps in chains, Silas believed her. The aftermath was messy, in the way violence always is. Marshal Cooper and his deputies rounded up Wade's men, the ones who hadn't run, and the ones too injured to flee. They lined them up in Wade's yard, hands bound, faces ranging from defiant to terrified. Wade himself sat on the ground near the porch steps, bleeding through the bandage one of the deputies had slapped on his shoulder, his eyes burning with rage that had nowhere left to go. Silas stood with Clara, watching it all unfold, his arms still around her shoulders because he wasn't quite ready to let go. She leaned into him, exhausted, the adrenaline draining out of her in waves that left her shaking. Around them, the ranchers were gathering, some tending to minor wounds, others just standing there in shock, trying to process that it was actually over. Tom Dunner approached, his face streaked with powder burn and sweat. "We got 3 men wounded, nothing serious. Could have been a lot worse." "Could have been," Silas agreed. He looked at Wade, slumped and defeated, and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph. Just a bone-deep tiredness and the overwhelming relief that Clara was still breathing beside him. Marshal Cooper walked over, pulling off his gloves. "We'll take Wade and his men back to the territorial capital for trial. With the testimony you've all provided and the evidence we've gathered, he's looking at 20 years minimum, maybe more." "What about his property?" Morton asked. "The land, the water rights? That'll be sorted out in court. But given the circumstances, I imagine the territorial governor will revoke his water monopoly and redistribute the rights fairly among the valley ranchers." Cooper looked around at the assembled men. "You all did good work here today. Took courage to stand up to a man like Wade." "Wasn't courage," Clara said quietly. "Was necessity. You run out of choices. You find out what you're made of." Cooper studied her for a moment, something like respect in his eyes. "Well, whatever it was, it worked. Valley's yours again." He tipped his hat and walked back to supervise the loading of prisoners into wagons. Silas watched Wade being hauled to his feet, saw him stumble and catch himself, saw the way his eyes swept over the ranchers one last time, looking for someone to blame, someone to hate. His gaze landed on Clara, and his mouth twisted into something ugly. "This is your fault," Wade said, his voice hoarse. "You came here and poisoned everything, turned good men against each other." Clara looked at him, and her expression was flat, empty of emotion. No, you did that yourself. I just stopped letting you get away with it. You think you've won? Wade laughed, bitter and broken. You haven't won anything. This valley will eat you alive, the land, the weather, the loneliness. It'll grind you down until there's nothing left. You'll see.
Maybe, Clara said. But at least I'll see it free. They loaded Wade into the wagon, and he didn't say anything else, just sat there staring at nothing as the marshal's convoy rolled out, carrying him away from the empire he'd built on fear and theft. The ranchers watched them go, silent, until the dust settled and the valley felt empty again.
Then someone started laughing. Silas turned and saw it was the younger Cray brother, his face split in a wide, disbelieving grin. We did it, he said. We actually did it. The laughter spread, relief and exhaustion mixing into something that sounded almost like joy. Men clapped each other on the back, shook hands, traded stories about the fight that would grow more elaborate with each telling. Morton pulled out his flask and passed it around, and for a few minutes the weight lifted. But Silas couldn't quite join in. He was too aware of Clara beside him, too conscious of how close they'd come to losing everything. He kept seeing her walk through that gunfire, kept feeling the spike of terror that had driven through his chest like a nail. Clara seemed to sense it. She looked up at him, and her smile faded. You're mad at me. I'm not mad. You're something.
Yeah. He took a breath. I'm terrified. I'm relieved. I'm a dozen things at once, and I don't know how to sort through any of it. Want to go home? She asked. Home. The words settled into him, warm and right. Yeah, I do.
They said their goodbyes, promised to meet with the others later to discuss water rights and rebuilding, then rode back to the ranch in silence. The sun was high now, burning off the morning chill, and the land stretched out around them, brown and harsh and beautiful in its own stubborn way. When they reached the house, Clara dismounted with a wince, her hand going to her bruised ribs. Silas came around to help her, and she let him, which told him more about how much pain she was in than any words could. Inside, the house felt different, quieter somehow, safer. Silas helped Clara to a chair, then fetched water and clean cloth to tend to the cut above her eyebrow. She sat still while he worked, her eyes half closed, and he tried not to think about how easily that cut could have been a bullet. You should rest, he said when he finished. I should, but I won't. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Not yet. Clara,
I know what I did out there was stupid. Walking through gunfire, charging Wade like that. I know. She reached up and caught his hand, but I needed him to know he didn't own me. Didn't own any of us. Sometimes you have to do something stupid to prove a point. You could have died, but I didn't. She squeezed his hand. I'm here. You're here. We're both still standing. That's what matters.
Silas wanted to argue, wanted to make her promise she'd never do anything that reckless again. But he knew it would be pointless. Clara Whitmore was who she was, fierce and stubborn and brave to the point of foolishness. He couldn't change that. Didn't want to change it, even if it scared the hell out of him. You remember what you said before you left? He asked, about figuring out what we are to each other when this was over. Clara's expression shifted, something uncertain flickering across her face. I remember. Well, it's over. Silas pulled her to her feet, careful of her ribs, and cupped her face in his hands. And I know what we are. At least what I want us to be. What's that? Everything. He said it simply, honestly. I want you to be everything, Clara. Not just my wife on paper, not just my partner. I want mornings waking up next to you and nights falling asleep knowing you're there. I want to fight with you and laugh with you and build something real. I love you. I think I have for a while now, but I was too scared to say it. Clara stared at him, her eyes wide and bright. For a moment she didn't say anything, and Silas felt panic creep in. Then she smiled, slow and real, and pulled him down into a kiss that tasted like dust and blood and promise. When they broke apart, she was crying, not sobbing, just tears sliding down her cheeks, and she didn't bother wiping them away. I love you too, she said, her voice rough. I didn't think I would. Didn't think I could. But somewhere between the work and the fear, and you looking at me like I mattered, it just happened. You're the first person in my whole life who's ever made me feel like I was exactly who I was supposed to be. Silas kissed her again, softer this time, and felt the last pieces of his broken heart slot back into place. This wasn't the same as what he'd had with Sarah. Sarah had been gentle and steady, a quiet love built over years. Clara was fire and edges, a love forged in crisis and tempered by survival. But it was real, and it was his. They spent the rest of the day doing nothing important. Clara slept for a few hours while Silas handled chores. When she woke, they ate a simple supper together, and the conversation drifted from the fight to plans for the future. They talked about expanding the herd, maybe buying some of Wade's forfeited land if the price was right. They talked about fixing up the house, adding a second room, maybe even building a proper barn. They talked like people who had a future to plan for. That night, Clara didn't go to her own room. She went to Silas's, and he followed, and for the first time since she'd stepped off that train months ago, they were truly husband and wife in every sense. It wasn't smooth or perfect. Clara's ribs hurt, and Silas was clumsy with nerves, and they laughed more than once at the awkwardness of it all. But it was real. It was theirs. Afterward, Clara lay with her head on his chest, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his skin. "I never thought I'd have this," she said quietly. "What?" "Someone who wanted me as I am. No conditions, no expectations, just me." Silas tightened his arm around her. "You're all I want." She tilted her head up to look at him. "Even when I'm being reckless and stubborn?" "Especially then." He kissed her forehead. "You wouldn't be Clara Whitmore if you weren't." "Boone," she corrected. "Clara Boone." He smiled. "Yeah, that too." The weeks that followed brought a strange new rhythm to the valley. With Wade gone and his men scattered, the fear that had hung over everything lifted like smoke clearing. The territorial governor did indeed revoke Wade's water monopoly, redistributing the rights among the valley ranchers in a way that was actually fair. Stolen cattle were returned to their rightful owners, though plenty had been sold off and were lost for good. The valley wasn't whole, but it was healing. Silas and Clara threw themselves into rebuilding. They repaired fences, moved the herd back to better pasture, and started work on expanding the house. Other ranchers came to help, returning the favor from when Silas and Clara had stood with them against Wade. It became a community effort, people working together in a way the valley hadn't seen in years. Clara proved herself over and over in those weeks. She worked alongside the men without complaint, earning respect that had nothing to do with being Silas's wife and everything to do with her own grit. Women in town started talking to her instead of about her, asking for advice on everything from mending harnesses to dealing with difficult husbands. She became part of the valley's fabric in a way that surprised even her. One afternoon, Silas found her sitting on the new porch they'd built, staring out at the land. He sat down beside her, and she leaned into him automatically, a gesture that had become habit. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Coming here, I mean." Clara thought about it. "No, it's been hard and scary, and there were times I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. But I don't regret it. I found something here I didn't even know I was looking for." "What's that?" "A place where I fit. And you." She looked at him. "Mostly you." Silas kissed her temple. "I'm glad you fit. This place wouldn't be the same without you." "It'd be quieter," Claire said with a small smile. "Quieter's overrated." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The land was still harsh, still unforgiving, but it felt less like an enemy now. More like something they could work with, something they could shape into a life worth living. 2 months after Wade's arrest, Clara missed her monthly cycle. Then she missed the next one. By the time the 3rd month came around, there was no denying it. She was pregnant. Silas found out when he walked into the house one evening and found her sitting at the table, staring at nothing, her face pale. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately alert. Clara looked up at him, and her expression was complicated, fear and wonder, and something else he couldn't quite name. "I'm pregnant." The words hit him like a physical blow. For a moment, he couldn't process them. Then joy surged up, so sudden and overwhelming he felt lightheaded. "You're sure?" "Pretty sure. I've been sick every morning for a week, and I'm late. Really late." She twisted her hands together. "Silas, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know how to be a mother. I don't know if I'm even supposed to be one." He crossed to her and pulled her to her feet, holding her close. "You'll figure it out. We both will. Together." "What if I'm terrible at it?" "Then you'll be terrible at it the same way you were terrible at writing when you first got here." He pulled back to look at her. Which is to say, you'll fall off a few times, get back up, and keep going until you're not terrible anymore. Clara laughed, shaky but real. That's a terrible pep talk. It's the truth. He cupped her face in his hands. You're the toughest person I know, Clara. You walked through gunfire. You stared down Wade Cutter. You can handle a baby. A baby's different. Yeah, it is. He smiled. But you're not doing it alone. I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere. She searched his face, looking for doubt or fear, but all she found was certainty. Slowly, her expression shifted from fear to something softer. We're having a baby. We're having a baby, Silas agreed. Clara threw her arms around his neck and held on tight, and Silas felt his world expand in a way it never had before. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was life, real and messy, and full of possibility. The pregnancy wasn't easy. Clara was sick constantly in the first few months, losing weight she couldn't afford to lose. She couldn't ride as much, couldn't do the heavy work she was used to, and the frustration ate at her. Silas took on more of the load, and the other ranchers helped when they could, but Clara hated feeling limited. I'm useless, she muttered one morning, sitting on the porch while Silas saddled the horses. You're growing a human being. That's not useless. I'm not doing anything. I'm just sitting here getting fat. Silas walked over and crouched in front of her. You're doing the most important work there is, and you're doing it while dealing with a body that's trying to turn itself inside out. So don't tell me you're useless. Clara's eyes welled up, and she wiped at them angrily. I hate crying. I never used to cry. Blame the baby? Silas kissed her forehead. I'll be back by supper. Try not to work yourself into the ground while I'm gone. No promises, she said, but she smiled a little. As the months passed, Clara's body changed in ways that fascinated and terrified her. Her belly grew round and heavy, and she felt the baby move. Little flutters at first, then stronger kicks that made her gasp. Silas would put his hand on her stomach at night and feel the movement, his expression full of wonder. What do you think it'll be? Clara asked one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her belly. Doesn't matter. Boy, girl, I'll love it either way. But if you had to guess? Silas thought about it. A girl, stubborn and fierce, just like her mother. Clara laughed. Poor kid. She's going to have her hands full with both of us. Yeah, Silas agreed. She will. The valley continued to heal around them. The water rights dispute was settled, and ranchers could irrigate their land without fear of retaliation. Cattle numbers started to recover. New families moved into the empty homesteads, drawn by the promise of land and opportunity now that Wade's shadow was gone. Red Hollow itself changed. The town organized a proper council, elected officials who actually cared about the community instead of Wade's wallet. Sheriff Taggart resigned under pressure and left the territory altogether. A new sheriff took his place, a fair-minded man named Brennan who believed in the law more than whoever could afford to pay him. Clara became something of a legend in the valley. People talked about the woman who'd walked through gunfire to bring down Wade Cutter, who'd built a life on land that tried to break her, who'd stood up when everyone else wanted to hide. Some of the stories were true. Some were exaggerated. Clara didn't bother correcting them. She just kept working, kept living, kept building the life she'd fought so hard for. As her due date approached, Silas found himself terrified in a way he hadn't been even during the fight with Wade. This was different. This was Clara's life on the line, and the baby's, and he couldn't shoot his way out of it. All he could do was be there and hope it was enough. The labor started on a cold October morning. Clara woke him before dawn, her face tight with pain. It's time. Silas's mind went blank with panic. Then training kicked in. He'd prepared for this, had gone over what to do a dozen times. He got Clara settled in bed, sent one of the hired hands to fetch the midwife from town, boiled water, gathered clean cloths. Clara gripped his hand through the contractions, her nails digging into his skin hard enough to draw blood. I can't do this, she gasped at one point, sweat soaking her hair. Yes, you can. Silas, you can do anything. He smoothed her hair back from her face. You've done harder things than this. You've survived worse. You can do this. She looked at him with eyes that were half wild with pain and fear. Don't leave. I'm not going anywhere. The midwife arrived and took over with calm efficiency, and Silas stepped back to let her work. But he stayed in the room, stayed where Clara could see him, and every time she looked his way, he nodded like everything was going to be fine. He hoped to hell he was right. The labor lasted 14 hours. 14 hours of Clara screaming and cursing and crying, of the midwife murmuring encouragement, of Silas pacing and praying to nothing in particular because he didn't know what else to do. Then, just as the sun was setting, a thin, angry wail cut through the room. "It's a girl," the midwife announced, wrapping the baby in a clean blanket. Silas's knees nearly gave out. He stumbled to the bedside where Clara lay exhausted and pale, and the midwife placed the baby in her arms. Clara looked down at the tiny, red-faced creature, and her expression shifted into something Silas had never seen before. Pure, unfiltered love. "She's so small," Clara whispered. "She's perfect," Silas said, his voice breaking. Clara looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "We made a person, Silas." "Yeah." He leaned down and kissed her, tasting salt and exhaustion. "We did." They named her Sarah, after Silas's first wife, because Clara insisted. "She gave you a life before me," Clara said. "She deserves to be remembered." Silas argued at first, worried it would hurt Clara, but she was adamant. "She was part of your story. Now she's part of ours." So Sarah it was. Sarah Boone, small and perfect and loud as hell when she wanted to be fed. She had Silas's dark hair and Clara's green eyes, and from the moment she entered the world, she owned both of them completely. The first few months were brutal. Sarah didn't sleep unless she was held, cried at the slightest discomfort, and needed constant attention. Clara was exhausted and overwhelmed, and there were nights she broke down crying, convinced she was doing everything wrong. "I'm terrible at this," she said one night, holding Sarah while the baby screamed. "She hates me." "She doesn't hate you, she's just a baby. This is what they do." Other women make this look easy. Other women lie. Silas took Sarah and bounced her gently, and miraculously she quieted. "You're doing fine, Clara. Better than fine. You're keeping her alive, fed, and loved. That's all she needs." Clara watched him with Sarah, and something in her expression softened. "You're good at this. So are you. You just don't see it yet." Slowly they found their rhythm. Clara learned to read Sarah's cries, to tell when she was hungry versus tired versus just angry at the world. Silas took over night feedings when he could, walking the floor with Sarah on his shoulder while Clara slept. They traded off, supported each other, figured it out together. And somewhere in the exhaustion and chaos, their family solidified into something real. Spring came, and with it, rain. Actual rain, not just the occasional drizzle, but real soaking storms that turned the valley green for the first time in years. The drought that had gripped the land for so long finally broke, and water flowed freely through the creeks and rivers. Pastures that had been brown and dead erupted with grass, and the cattle grew fat and healthy. It felt like a blessing, like the land itself was celebrating Wade's defeat. Silas and Clara stood on the porch one evening, watching the rain fall, Sarah asleep in Clara's arms. The air smelled clean and fresh, and the sound of water hitting the roof was almost musical. "I used to hate the rain," Clara said quietly. "Back east, it just made everything muddy and miserable. But here, it feels like hope." Silas wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "It is hope. It's life. It's everything we fought for." Clara leaned into him, careful not to jostle Sarah. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been? If I hadn't come here, if we hadn't fought Wade, if we'd just given up and left?" "Sometimes." Silas looked out at the rain-soaked land. "But then I think about this, you, me, Sarah, this place, and I can't imagine anything better. Even with all the hard parts, especially with the hard parts." He turned to look at her. "The hard parts are what made us. You don't get to the good stuff without walking through hell first." Clara smiled, small and tired, but genuine. "That's very profound for a rancher." "I have my moments." They stood there in the rain, the three of them, and Silas felt something settle deep in his chest. Peace, maybe. Or just the certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, with the people he was supposed to be with. The valley continued to grow and heal over the following year. More families arrived, drawn by the stories of good land and fair treatment. A schoolhouse was built in Red Hollow, and Clara talked about sending Sarah there when she was old enough. The Boone Ranch expanded, adding another 100 acres and doubling the size of the herd. Other ranchers prospered too, working together in ways that would have been impossible under Wade's rule. Wade himself was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in territorial prison. The news reached the valley 6 months after his arrest, and there was no celebration, just quiet satisfaction. Justice had been done. That was enough. Silas and Clara's marriage deepened in ways that surprised them both. They fought sometimes, sharp arguments about money or how to run the ranch or whose turn it was to deal with Sarah's tantrums. But they always made up, always found their way back to each other, because underneath everything else was a foundation of respect and love that couldn't be shaken. One night, after Sarah was asleep and they were sitting on the porch watching the stars, Clara said, "I'm glad I answered your letter." Silas smiled. "I'm glad you did too, even if you weren't what I ordered." "What did you order again? Plain and practical?" "Something like that," Clara laughed. "Well, you got stubborn and difficult instead. Hope that's all right." "It's better than all right." Silas pulled her close. "It's everything I didn't know I needed." She kissed him, slow and sweet, and they sat there in the darkness, wrapped in each other and the life they'd built from dust and determination. By the time Sarah took her first steps, toddling across the kitchen floor into Clara's waiting arms, Silas had stopped thinking about the past altogether. Sarah was gone, but not forgotten, honored in the name they'd given their daughter. Clara had stopped being the mail-order bride who'd disrupted his life and become simply Clara, his wife, his partner, the woman who'd saved him from a half-life of grief and isolation. The valley was theirs now. Not just Silas's, not just the ranchers, but everyone's. A community built on cooperation instead of fear, on fairness instead of greed. It wasn't perfect. There were still hard winters and dry summers, still cattle that got sick and crops that failed. But people faced those challenges together, and that made all the difference. Looking back, Silas realized the fight with Wade had never really been about cattle or water rights. It had been about something bigger, about refusing to let fear dictate how you lived, about standing up even when standing meant risking everything, about building something worth fighting for. Clara had understood that from the beginning. She'd walked into his life like a storm, refusing to be invisible, refusing to accept that things had to be the way they'd always been. She'd challenged him, pushed him, made him braver than he'd ever been alone. And in return, he'd given her the one thing she'd been searching for her whole life, a place where she belonged, exactly as she was. On Sarah's second birthday, they threw a party. Not a big one, just the neighbors and a few friends from town, but it was more than Silas had entertained in years. Clara baked a cake that came out lopsided but tasted fine, and Sarah smeared frosting all over her face and laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. Silas watched his wife and daughter, watched the way Clara's whole face lit up when Sarah giggled, and felt gratitude so profound it was almost painful. This was more than he'd ever hoped for, more than he'd thought possible after Sarah died and the world had gone gray. Morton Gill pulled him aside at one point, a cup of coffee in hand. "You look happy, Silas." "I am." "Good. You deserve it." Morton glanced at Clara, who was now chasing Sarah around the yard while other children joined in. "She's something special, that wife of yours." "Yeah," Silas agreed. "She is. Valley's better for having her here. Hell, we're all better for it." Silas nodded, because it was true. Clara had changed more than just his life. She'd changed the whole valley, proven that one person willing to stand up could make a difference, could shift the balance, could turn the tide. Not through violence or force, but through sheer stubborn refusal to accept that wrong was right just because it had always been that way. As the party wound down and the guests left, Silas helped Clara clean up while Sarah played in the yard, chasing butterflies with the single-minded determination she'd inherited from her mother. Clara moved around the kitchen, tired but content, humming something under her breath. "What are you thinking about?" Silas asked. She looked up, surprised. "Nothing important, just how different everything is from a year ago, 2 years ago, when I first got here." "Different good or different bad?" "Different good." She dried her hands and came to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "I was so scared when I got off that train, scared of you, scared of this place, scared I'd made a mistake I couldn't undo. And now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Silas held her, breathing in the scent of soap and sunshine and home. "I can't either." "We made it work," Clara said softly. "Against all the odds, we actually made it work."
We did.
And that Silas thought was the real story. Not the fight with Wade, or the stolen cattle, or even the dramatic showdown that had ended it all. The real story was two broken people finding each other, learning to trust, learning to love, building a life together on land that tried to break them. It was Clara refusing to be anything less than herself, and Silas learning to love her for it. It was late nights and early mornings, fights and makeups, exhaustion and joy all mixed together into something that felt finally like home. The rain came again that night, gentle and steady, and Silas and Clara stood on the porch with Sarah between them, watching the water fall. The land drank it in, greedy after years of drought, and everything felt washed clean. New. "Do you think she'll remember any of this?" Clara asked, nodding at Sarah. "Probably not. She's too young." "That's good. I'd rather she remember the good parts. The peace, the community, the home we've built. Not the fear." Silas squeezed her hand. "Then that's what we'll give her, a life worth remembering." Clara looked at him, and in her eyes he saw everything they'd been through and everything they'd become. "I love you, Silas Boone." "I love you too, Clara Boone." Sarah tugged on Silas's pant leg, demanding to be picked up, and he scooped her into his arms. She rested her head on his shoulder, her eyes already drooping with sleep, and Clara leaned against his other side, the three of them standing together in the rain. This was it. This was the life Silas had never thought he'd have again. Love and family and purpose and hope. It hadn't come easy. It had been fought for, bled for, earned through pain and fear and sheer stubborn determination. But it was real, and it was his, and he'd never take a single moment of it for granted. The valley stretched out before them, dark and quiet under the rain, but no longer threatening. Just land. Just home. And standing there on the porch with his wife and daughter, Silas finally understood what Clara had been trying to tell him all along. You don't need an easy life. You need a life worth fighting for. You need people who'll stand with you when things get hard, who'll love you through the bad parts, who'll help you build something real from the dust and the fear and the endless work. He'd wanted safe when he'd written that letter asking for a plain, practical wife. He'd wanted someone who wouldn't demand anything from him, who'd let him stay locked in his grief, who'd be easy to forget. Instead, he'd gotten Clara Whitmore, who was none of those things, who'd demanded everything from him and given everything in return, who'd fought beside him, loved him, saved him in ways he was still discovering. And that, Silas realized, was exactly what he'd needed all along. Not safe, not easy, just real, just Clara. Just this life they'd built together from nothing but determination and hope and the unshakable belief that tomorrow could be better than today if you were willing to fight for it. The rain fell, the land healed, and the Boone family stood together on the porch of their small ranch house, watching the future take shape in the darkness. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Silas Boone looked at tomorrow and felt nothing but anticipation. Because tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new struggles. But it would also bring Clara's laugh and Sarah's smile and the knowledge that whatever came, they'd face it together. And that, in the end, was all that mattered.